If the greatness of a river is determined by its size, then the Mississippi is a great river. If the importance of a river valley is measured by its beauty and by its bounty, then the valley of the Mississippi is an important valley. But the description of a great river must go beyond the simple fact of its size, or the beauty and richness of its valley. Great rivers chart the course of history. They shape the lives of people and nations. For nearly a century and a half after La Salle first claimed it for France, the valley of the Mississippi was both the prize and the pawn of kings and queens, emperors and presidents. It was claimed and reclaimed, won and lost, bought and sold. For nearly 150 years, the river and its valley were the prize and pawn of empires. A small lake in northern Minnesota, Lake Itasca, headwaters of the Mississippi. From here, the river begins a long, remarkable journey to the sea. After it is joined by its longest tributary, the Missouri, and its largest tributary, the Ohio, the Mississippi becomes a river of epic proportions. From start to finish, the river flows well over 2,000 miles, then empties its contents into the Gulf of Mexico in spectacular fashion. Like a forked tongue, it divides into a series of channels or passes. These passes cut through the swampland of southern Louisiana and link the river to the ocean. But if the length of the Mississippi is impressive, then the size and scope of its valley is staggering. Its widest perimeters stretch from western Wyoming and Montana to western New York and Pennsylvania. From the Rockies to the Appalachians. From the Yellowstone to the Youghiogheny. Water from 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces flows into the Mississippi. Among the rivers of the world, only the Amazon and Congo have larger watersheds. Throughout most of the middle third of the American continent, every rook and rill, creek and culvert, brook and bayou flow into one river, the Mississippi. Chippewa Indians called it Mekassebi. The pronunciation was corrupted into Mississippi. However, the meaning of the word remained poetically accurate. It was indeed the Father of Waters. The first Americans to populate the valley were nomadic hunters and left little evidence of their existence. They lived about 12,000 or more years ago, and historians and archaeologists are still uncertain as to where they came from, how long they stayed, or why they disappeared. Later on, other prehistoric cultures appeared. They were identified by the burial mounds they built for their dead leaders. Some mounds were cone-shaped. Others, called effigy mounds, were built to resemble the shapes of animals. About 900 AD, another distinct culture appeared. These people lived in carefully constructed grass huts. They developed skills in farming and trading. In the center of their village, they built large temple mounds where ceremonial and religious customs were observed. The Cahokia site, near present-day East St. Louis, was the largest and most sophisticated Indian civilization north of Mexico. However, by the time of Columbus, this culture had also disappeared, and descendants were living in tribal families scattered throughout the valley. The Chippewa, the Iowa, the Illinois, the Missouri, the Natchez. There, fixed in place and time, they would observe the coming of the white man. In less than 50 years after Columbus's first voyage, Spain had carved out an enormous American empire. Part of South America, all of Central America and Mexico, and the gold and silver plundered from these conquered lands brought untold wealth to the Spanish crown. Now, in 1539, Hernando de Soto leads an expedition into the heart of North America in search of gold and silver. 2 years later, in 1541, de Soto reaches the Mississippi. But for him, the wide river is not a prize. It is an obstacle. A year later, it will be his grave. After de Soto died of malaria, his men placed his body in the river and retreated to the Gulf of Mexico. No white man would touch the banks of the Mississippi for the next 130 years. During the 1600s, as the English and Dutch settled the Atlantic coast, French explorers followed the St. Lawrence River to the Great Lakes and beyond. It is a land of dense forests and abundant lakes and rivers, ideal for birch bark canoes, and ideal for trapping any four-legged creatures with fur on their back. American Indians trap, and French voyagers transport. They are supplying a roaring demand for furs in Europe. As the fur trade expands west, French merchants are anxious to find a river that flows to the Pacific. In 1673, a government agent, Louis Joliet, and a Jesuit priest, Father Jacques Marquette, explore the Mississippi as far south as the present-day state of Arkansas. They predict that the river empties into the Gulf of Mexico. 9 years later, fur trader Sieur de La Salle follows the river to its mouth and claims nothing less than the whole Mississippi watershed for France. He names it Louisiana in honor of his king, Louis XIV. At the start of the next century, France begins to colonize the lower Mississippi Valley. In 1718, on a bend of the river, at a point near Lake Pontchartrain, a town is laid out, New Orleans. At the same time, upriver and on tributaries, the French built forts and stockades. Some are washed away by spring floods. Some are rebuilt in stone. But stone does not symbolize the extent or tenacity of French occupation. The French do not domesticate the valley with the same intensity that England domesticates the coast. However, by the 1750s, French Canadians are paddling and portaging the fur business southwest into the Mississippi Valley. Voyagers have established trade rendezvous with trappers and Indian tribes on the Wabash, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Mississippi rivers. But when France attempts to tie the two ends of its empire together by building a chain of forts through the Ohio Valley, England counters with war. The French and Indian War. In this military matchup, the French and Indians fight the English and Americans until the Iroquois join the English cause and bolster it to victory. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 gives England all of the French territory in North America, except for the land west of the Mississippi and the city of New Orleans, both of which France had ceded to Spain before the conclusion of the war. Although France lost title to Louisiana, a legacy of French America remained. There were thousands of French-speaking people, and there were French towns and settlements along the river: New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Saint Genevieve, Prairie du Chien. And in 1764, a fur trading post was established, St. Louis. It was the last official French act in the valley until 1800. For the next 36 years, the Mississippi and all the land west of it would be ruled by Spain. And for Spain, it would be an uneasy rule. Ignoring the proclamation of 1763, which reserved the land to the east of the Mississippi for the Indians, colonial America pushes west past the Appalachians and into the Ohio Valley. In retaliation to this expansion, Spain closes the port of New Orleans to American trade. Later, when the port is opened a high tax is placed on American goods. Meanwhile, Americans living on the other side of the Appalachians are experiencing even greater frustrations. And in 1776, the 13 American colonies declare war on England. Although most war activities occur on the Atlantic seaboard, George Rogers Clark leads a successful campaign into the Mississippi Valley and significantly reduces England's hold on the valley. For the Revolutionary War, the military matchup changes. Now the Indians who had fought with the French fight for the English. And the French who had fought against Americans come to their aid. After the United States gains independence in 1783, settlers come crashing through the Appalachians in astounding numbers. And again there is conflict. On the river, Spain is still hostile. On land, the drums of war are beating. Tribes who had fought with the French and later the English now fight for themselves. However, in less than 2 generations, most Indians dwelling east of the Mississippi will be removed from their ancestral lands forever. Politically, their fate is sealed by international events. In 1800, Spain returns the territory of Louisiana to France, into the hands of the Emperor Napoleon. But Napoleon's dream for a new French empire in America is destroyed by the threat of war in Europe, and by a slave revolt in the West Indies that kills 24,000 French soldiers. Napoleon is ready to sell, and President Thomas Jefferson is eager to buy. In 1803, for the sum of $15 million, the United States purchases Louisiana from France, and the young republic more than doubles its land area for 3 cents an acre. There is, however, one catch to the proceedings. The United States Treasury is depleted, and the government must borrow the required money from England. The English, of course, are quite willing. They are not anxious to have Louisiana occupied by Napoleon's powerful armies. And, too, England has never evacuated many of its forts in the Northwest Territory. In fact, under the auspices of the Hudson's Bay Company, the English are building new forts and trading posts in order to capitalize on the booming business of beaver pelts. In early 19th century society, beaver hats are the rage. But when Americans discover that English officials are again arming the Indians, they are ready to fight. The War of 1812 is similar to the Revolution. It's the Americans versus the English and the Indians. After 3 years, a treaty is signed, and 2 weeks after that, the last battle is fought, the Battle of New Orleans. American troops led by Andrew Jackson completely rout a much larger English force, and the one-sided victory makes Jackson a national hero. The War of 1812 was the last attempt by a foreign power to gain control of the Mississippi Valley. After nearly 150 years of being claimed and reclaimed, won and lost, bought and sold, this great expanse began to settle comfortably under one flag. Yet already there was a strange-looking contraption on the river that would radically transform the complexion of the whole valley. For most of the 19th century, the steamboat and the Mississippi carried on a romance rarely equaled in American history.
Steamboating on the Mississippi was born in 1811. At the end of 40 years, it had grown to mighty proportions. And as thousands of steamboats churned up and down the river, many a sleepy river town was jolted to life by a distant whistle. And by the familiar cry of the townspeople, "Steamboat a-comin'! Steamboat a-comin'!" When I was a boy, there was but one permanent ambition among my comrades, and that was to be a steamboat man. Mark Twain grew up as Samuel Clemens in the small river town of Hannibal, Missouri. Later on, he wrote about the excitement caused by a steamboat. People fastened their eyes upon a coming boat as upon a wonder they were seeing for the first time. But steamboats were a lot more than just something fancy to look at. For towns and settlements along the river, they were the door to the rest of the world. They brought friends and relatives, letters and packages, notions and necessities. They carried everything, it was said, from cotton to coon dogs. But what was most important, they could do it upstream. Before steamboats, trade and transportation was downstream. Rafts, barges, flatboats. After the cargo was unloaded in New Orleans, they were sold for lumber, and the boat crew tramped home on foot, unless by chance they could hitch a ride on a keel boat. Keel boats were designed to go back upriver, but it took 3 to 4 months of poling and pulling to do it. In 1811, Nicholas Roosevelt piloted the first steamboat down the Ohio River and into the Mississippi. The boat was named for its destination, New Orleans. Advertisements failed to attract even one passenger. No one believed it could survive the swirling currents and changing channels of western waters. 3.5 months later, the New Orleans arrived in New Orleans. It had not only survived the river, it had survived Indian attacks, fires on board, and the New Madrid earthquake. A whopping disaster where islands vanished, bluffs collapsed, and towns disappeared. As years passed and steamboats increased in numbers, they caused a revolution in river commerce and created boom cities on the river. New Orleans, the old French and Spanish capital. In the 1840s, It was the second largest and busiest port in America. St. Louis, outfitting center for exploration and settlement to the west. At St. Louis, there was a geographical break in the river. North of the city, the Mississippi choked with ice. Also, the river was not as deep, and cargo had to be reloaded onto smaller boats. Because of climate and shallow water, the upper Mississippi was settled at a slower rate. Far into the 1800s, it was still the domain of trappers, traders, and voyagers. In fact, the source of the Mississippi was not discovered until 1832. In 1832, Henry Schoolcraft named a small lake in northern Minnesota Itasca. Itasca was the combination of two Latin words that meant true head. Downriver about 500 miles, Fort Snelling was located just below St. Anthony Falls, the northern limit of steamboat navigation. During the early years of steamboat traffic on the upper Mississippi, the federal government was the biggest ticket buyer, transporting troops and supplies and relocating Indian tribes. Before the Civil War, there was a distinct contrast between the upper and lower Mississippi. The upper valley was largely settled by farmers and merchants, small farms or small firms, a one-man, one-family operation. The lower valley was a completely different world. Although there were small farms scattered about, most of the economy centered around a large plantation. Southern folk were not farmers, they were planters, and their cash crop was cotton. The invention of the cotton gin, ideal growing conditions, and slave labor spawned a widespread aristocracy. And the wealth of this aristocracy was most evident in the magnificent style and architecture of the plantation home. The 1850s steamboat could not match the elegance of the southern mansion, but it was the most comfortable, cheapest, and fastest means of transportation in the West. Wagons and stagecoaches were troubled by rough roads, or no road at all. Canals laced parts of the valley together, but the traffic never paid for the enormous construction costs. As railroads struggled to build level road beds through tall mountains, hundreds of stern-wheelers and side-wheelers were steaming up and down the Mississippi and its tributaries. Western steamboats were different from their eastern cousins. They had flat bottoms and drew less than 6 feet of water fully loaded. Instead of one low-pressure engine, they had 2 high-pressure engines located on the first deck. Passenger accommodations were above. The average lifespan of the Western steamboat was 4 years. Most disasters fell in one of 4 categories: fires, snags, explosions, collisions. However, if a boat could last just 1 year, it usually turned a handsome profit for its owner. Mark Twain was 19 years old when he began his steamboat career as a cub pilot. I entered upon the small enterprise of learning 12 or 1,300 miles of the great Mississippi River with the easy confidence of my time of life. If I had really known what I was about to require of my faculties, I should not have had the courage to begin. I supposed that all a pilot had to do was keep his boat in the river, and I did not consider that to be much of a trick, since the river was so wide.
My boy, there's only one way to be a pilot, and that is to get this entire river by heart. You have to know the shape of the river perfectly. But mind you, it hasn't the same shape at night that it does in the daytime. And it has a different shape on a clear, starlit night than it does on a pitch-dark night. Then there's your gray mist. On one of these nights, the shoreline doesn't have a definite shape. And you have to remember that different kinds of moonlight change the shape of the river in different ways. At this point, 2 things were apparent to me. One was that in order to be a pilot, a man had to learn more than any man ought to be allowed to know. The other was he had to learn it all over again in a different way every 24 hours. Two years after Mark Twain earned his pilot's license, the nation was divided by civil war. Steamboats were used to transport soldiers and supplies, or converted into armored gunboats. Under the command of General Ulysses S. Grant, Northern armies attacked Confederate strongholds in the valley. Fort Donelson, Fort Henry, Shiloh, Island Number 10. After Memphis and New Orleans were captured, only the town and fortress of Vicksburg remained. Built on high bluffs overlooking the river, Vicksburg turned back Grant's army for more than 6 months.
Finally, in desperation, Grant ordered a siege. On July 4th, 1863, 45 days after the siege began, Vicksburg surrendered. And in the words of President Lincoln, the Father of Waters again flowed unvexed to the sea. After the austere years of the war, steamboat construction resumed on a grand scale, bigger than ever before, more luxurious than anything on shore. Thick carpets, velvet-trimmed furniture, cut glass chandeliers, and plush dining rooms offered 10-course meals. For the steamboat, it was a golden era. There were races, contests, gamblers, showboats, Yet, for steam on water, it was a late autumn sun. By the 1880s, steam on land was casting a long, dark shadow on its future. At first, railroads built east and west. They connected the big rivers that flowed north and south. But then, they began to build north and south, in many cases, right along the river banks. And, too, the Mississippi Valley was no longer the rim of the West. The West was California, Oregon, Washington. And as trains continued across the continent, steamboats carried their building supplies. And in so doing, they hastened their own doom. Railroads could operate in both summer and winter, and they could do in 2 or 3 days what it took steamboats a week to do. By the turn of the century, the glory days of steamboating on the Mississippi were gone. In the early 1900s, there were towboats and excursion boats. But people no longer fastened their eyes upon a coming boat as upon a wonder they were seeing for the first time. The steamboat experience, however, is not entirely committed to the past, to the old drawings and the old photographs. There are today dozens of boats still churning the Mississippi and its great tributaries. It's true that they provide only a fleeting glimpse of bygone days. Ah, but it's also true that they beckon to a jet age. They recall to a computerized generation a time when a steamboat whistle was the sweetest music in the world. And sleepy river towns were awakened by the magical shout, "Steamboat a-comin'! Steamboat a-comin'!"
More than 100 years ago, Mark Twain wrote, "The Mississippi is not a commonplace river. On the contrary, it is in all ways remarkable." "The river is too wide. It can't be done." Back in the 1860s, most people thought it was impossible to build a bridge across the river at St. Louis. But James Eads, chief architect and engineer, was not easily discouraged. Must we admit that because a thing has never been done, that it never can be? Completed in 1874, the Eads Bridge was the second bridge to span the Mississippi. In its day, it was hailed as an engineering marvel, a colossal achievement. It remains today one of 100 or more bridges crossing the river. And where bridges are scarce, ferry boats provide a shore-to-shore shuttle. For most of the 19th century, steamboats ruled trade and transportation. But when railroads got big, only one form of steamboat stayed competitive, the towboat. Towboating first began when steamboats pulled rafts and flatboats during periods of low water. Later on, it was discovered that pushing was more efficient than pulling, but the name towboat stuck. During World War I, railroads could not satisfy national transportation demands. This led to the formation of the federal barge line and ultimately proved what rivermen had always contended, that bulk freight could be transported much cheaper by water than by rail. Since the 1950s, diesel-powered towboats have pushed their staggering loads in a fraction of the time it took the romantic but cumbersome old stern wheelers. Millions of tons of cargo are carried annually up and down the Mississippi and its tributaries. Grain and gravel, coal and cotton, iron and steel, oil and chemicals. In the last century, steamboat pilots worked the river from memory. Today's pilots are surrounded by mountains of electronic equipment. Between St. Paul and St. Louis, the river is straighter, but more shallow. In order to keep barges moving during low water, the Army Corps of Engineers constructed 27 locks and dams. Working like a chain of lakes, they keep the channel depth above the 9-foot minimum. Most lock-throughs take from 30 to 90 minutes. Both large and small craft use the locks free of charge. Although radar and sonar enable tows to operate in darkness, most pilots won't risk boat and cargo in dense fog. North of St. Louis, the river freezes. For 2 or 3 months each year, navigation is impossible. South of St. Louis, the Mississippi is deeper and wider, for the most part a broad river highway to the Gulf. There are no locks and dams, and barges up to several football fields in length are guided to and from the sprawling industrial corridor between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Here, cargo is transferred to ocean-going vessels for shipment to ports around the world. Over a century ago, all of this was nearly lost. A large sandbar had blocked the mouth of the river, and only the smallest deepwater ships could pass. New Orleans dropped from 2nd to 11th in exports and imports. Ultimately, the dilemma was solved by James Eads, the same man who built the St. Louis Bridge. His system of dikes and jetties forced the river to scour a deeper channel and cut through the sandbar. Within a year, New Orleans regained its status as a leading world port. Even today, this great navigational network is periodically threatened. The Mississippian flood is not commonplace. It is awesome. flood of 1927, worst on record for the lower valley, drove 700,000 people from their homes and spurred Congress to fund a mammoth flood control project. To shackle the wild and furious notions of the river, the Corps of Engineers developed a comprehensive plan. Some of the features of this plan include channel cutoffs that shorten the river and reduce flood heights, reservoirs and dams that regulate water flow along tributaries, dikes that improve and stabilize the shipping channel, and powerful dredges that deepen it. To prevent caving and erosion, reinforced concrete mattresses are dropped along the bank and into the riverbed. Like shingles on a roof, one mattress overlaps the next. This overlapping process is repeated until the mattresses extend beyond the deepest part of the river. The first levee was built to protect New Orleans. Completed in 1727, it was a mile long and 3 feet high. Now a levee system longer and higher than the Great Wall of China encloses most of the river south of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Built into levee walls, spillways and floodways release water from the main channel during major floods. The conquest of the Mississippi has been called one of the most ambitious undertakings ever conceived by man. There has been much progress, but not without problems. One problem is occurring in the swamps of southern Louisiana. Before levees were built, the Mississippi would overtop its banks each spring and spread a rich layer of silt over the delta. This silt rejuvenated the marshland and enabled it to maintain its delicate environmental balance. Now the fertile sediment is funneled out to sea, and Louisiana's coastal marshland is disappearing at the rate of 50 square miles a year. Another problem exists where the Atchafalaya River branches off from the Mississippi and takes a shortcut to the Gulf. Back in the 1880s, the Atchafalaya was a sluggish stream choked with logs and vegetation. But work crews broke up the log jams, and after the 1927 flood, the Corps of Engineers turned the Atchafalaya Basin into an escape route for rampaging floodwaters. But as more and more water entered the Atchafalaya, less and less stayed in the Mississippi. If this pattern continued and the river changed its course, the consequences would be devastating. The main flow of the river would completely bypass the established seaports of Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Morgan City would be submerged in water, and large portions of coastal marshland would be destroyed, creating serious ecological and commercial problems. The single mechanism preventing this catastrophe is the old river control structure. Built in the early 1960s and scarred and weakened by the flood of 1973. There is concern, grave concern, that it might not stand up to another massive flood. Fortunately, help is on the way. A backup control structure is scheduled for completion in 1985. The Mississippi is notorious for changing its course. Most of the river that La Salle floated down 300 years ago is now solid ground. In some places on the lower river, where the floodplain is flat and wide, the Mississippi loops and uncoils like a frightened snake. Occasionally, it cuts through a loop and shortens itself by 30 miles or more. People living in Mississippi suddenly discover that they are on the Louisiana side of the river. They would be paying taxes in another state, except that now the river is no longer the state boundary. Threaded along the entire length of the Mississippi, there are lush backwaters, pockets of wilderness ideal for fish and waterfowl. On the river itself, there are numerous opportunities for rest and recreation. In their homemade pontoon boat, Betty and Jack Walker have explored the river from St. Paul to New Orleans. While some are at their best challenging the Mississippi, others are content to pursue its course in luxury and comfort. Just like in olden times, two paddle-wheelers, the Delta Queen and the Mississippi Queen, make regular cruises up and down the river. Following alongside the river, a designated network of roads and highways leads to scenic overlooks, parks and campgrounds, and to scientific and historical points of interest. New Orleans, like most cities on the river, is not commonplace. It is quite remarkable. Levees protecting New Orleans keep the Mississippi out, but since the city is lower than the river, they also keep the rainwater in. In the past, cemeteries have buried people above ground. Now, 21 pumping stations move the excess water up and out. World-famous Mardi Gras is a continuous round of masquerade balls, street pageants, and parades, and parades, and parades. All festivities conclude on Fat Tuesday, the day before Ash Wednesday and the beginning of Lent. The twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul are the head of towboat navigation on the river. Since the 1880s, they have celebrated their long winter with an ice carnival. On a large sandbar called Mud Island, the city of Memphis has constructed a scale model of the lower Mississippi Valley, from the Continental Divide to the Gulf of Mexico. Water level and rate of flow are computerized to coincide with the actual river. St. Louis, largest city on the Mississippi. A 630-foot stainless steel arch commemorates the city's strategic role as gateway to the West. On the river, there are two state capitals, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, St. Paul, Minnesota. And there are scores of picturesque river towns built into the bluffs of the Mississippi. The history of mankind in the Mississippi Valley is certainly not commonplace. It is remarkable indeed. Long ago, the valley was the dwelling place of the ancient mound builders. Later on, Indian tribes populated the valley and gave the river its name, Mississippi, Father of Waters. From across the ocean came white explorers and settlers. For 150 years, kings and emperors and presidents sold and bought, traded and fought. For 100 years, steamboats dominated commerce on the Mississippi and its tributaries. Throughout its history, the river has inspired authors, poets, musicians, and artists, and challenged inventors and engineers. In the 20th century, man and machinery have tried to harness the river's potential and minimize its dangers. Yet even with all of these accomplishments, it is hard not to wonder what surprises the unpredictable old river has in store for future generations. What surprises will there be for those living in the century to come?